Okay, wow. You've really given me a ton of stuff on the Suez Canal. I mean, it looks like you want to know it all.
Well, it's just such a fascinating topic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this 193-kilometer canal, it's like a, what they call it, a scar, almost across Egypt,
Yeah,
connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea.
it really is. And, it's incredible to think that people have been trying to connect those two bodies of water for millennia.
Oh, I know. It's amazing. We're not just talking like the modern era.
Right.
We're going way back like ancient pharaohs, right?
Oh, yeah,
Like
absolutely.
1850 BCE,
Yeah.
Pharaoh Senusret III
Uh-huh.
was already trying to like carve out a connection between the Nile and the Red Sea. Like,
Exactly.
how did they even think of that back then?
I know, it's incredible. It really shows you how long humans have been trying to make trade routes more efficient. I mean, even thousands of years ago, they were thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Of course, Senusret's Canal wasn't anything like what we have today. It was more of a seasonal thing, dependent on the Nile's floods.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't a permanent fixture like the Suez Canal we know today.
Right, right. But still, the ambition is just incredible, especially with the technology they have.
Oh, for sure.
And then fast forward a few millennia,
Yeah.
and we've got Ferdinand de Lesseps, the French diplomat.
Yeah.
This guy was determined to make this canal a reality. Like, I can't believe he actually convinced the Ottoman governor of Egypt to let him do it.
In 1854, no less.
Yeah.
And then, just 5 years later, in 1859, construction began.
Yeah, and what a construction project.
Oh, tell me about it. 10 years.
A decade.
1.5 million workers.
Wow.
74 million cubic meters of earth moved.
I mean, that's just crazy.
It really is.
And they did most of that by hand, didn't they?
A lot of it, yeah. Especially in the early years. Picks, shovels, baskets, you name it.
It's amazing what they accomplished, but it's also pretty tragic when you think about how many people died doing it.
It is. Thousands of workers lost their lives during the construction. Exhaustion, disease, accidents. It's a sobering reminder of the human cost of progress.
It is. But finally, in 1869, the canal opened. Ships sailing through, fireworks. I mean, it was a global event.
Absolutely. It marked a new era of global trade.
And I bet the impact was huge.
Oh, yeah. Immediate. Before the Suez Canal, ships going between Europe and Asia had to sail all the way around Africa. I mean, can you imagine?
Oh, around the Cape of Good Hope, that's, what, thousands of kilometers extra?
Thousands. The trip from London to Mumbai was over 19,000 kilometers around the Cape of Good Hope.
Oh, wow.
The Suez Canal cut that down to 12,000.
So that's like almost 7,000 kilometers saved.
Exactly.
No wonder the canal quickly became, and still is, such a crucial route for global trade.
Absolutely.
I mean, something like 12% of all global trade goes through the canal.
Right, and over 19,000 ships every year.
Speaking of ships, I have to ask you about the Ever Given.
Oh, yeah.
That was like something out of a movie, this 400-meter-long container ship.
Wedged sideways.
Yeah, stuck in the canal.
March 2021. It was quite a sight.
It was wild. This gigantic ship, longer than the Empire State Building, is tall, just bringing global trade to a screeching halt.
For 6 whole days.
6 days. But, I mean, it wasn't just an inconvenience, right? Like, what was the actual impact of this?
The economic impact was massive. Something like $9.6 billion worth of goods was held up every single day that the canal was closed.
Whoa.
And you might remember, it even led to a global shortage of toilet paper.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, because a lot of the world's pulp, the stuff they make toilet paper from, is shipped through the Suez Canal.
Huh, I never thought about that. It really shows how interconnected everything is and how fragile it all can be.
You got it.
So how did the Ever Given even get stuck like that? I mean, it seemed like such a bizarre thing to happen.
Well, it was a perfect storm of factors, really. You had strong winds, the narrowness of the canal at that point,
Yeah.
all sorts of things.
I remember seeing all those memes with the tiny excavator trying to dig it out.
Oh, yeah, those were great.
It seemed almost comical. Like, how could that little thing possibly move this massive ship?
It was a huge undertaking. They had to bring in like 13 tugboats, some with incredible pulling power.
Wow.
They used dredgers to scoop out sand from under the ship, too.
I bet that took forever.
It did. But you know what's really interesting?
What's that?
They actually used the tides to help free the Ever Given.
Wait, what? They timed the rescue with the tides?
Absolutely. They waited for a spring tide when the sun and moon are aligned and the tides are extra high.
Oh, wow.
That extra lift from the water, plus all the work the rescue teams were doing,
Yeah.
finally got the Ever Given free.
I bet everyone breathed a huge sigh of relief when that ship finally budged.
I'm sure they did.
Did Egypt ever get any money for all the trouble? I mean, think of all the money they lost.
Oh, they definitely sent a bill to Evergreen, the company that operated the Ever Given.
Right. I read that they wanted over $900 million.
They did.
Did they ever get it?
They ended up settling for $550 million.
Still a lot of money.
No kidding.
And then there's the Bitter Lakes, where they, like, impounded the Ever Given for months while they sorted everything out.
Those Bitter Lakes are actually part of canal, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're these naturally salty lakes that are actually built into the canal's design.
Wow.
Yeah, ships actually have to slow down when they go through them.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it's also where the canal gets super deep.
How deep are we talking?
Something like 24 meters deep. It's pretty amazing how they incorporated these natural features into the canal.
Oh, for sure. It's a marvel of engineering.
It really is. But I feel like we haven't even touched on the ecological side of the Suez Canal. Like, it's not just a shipping lane, is it? It's almost like a gateway between two completely different worlds.
Oh, you're right. And that's where things get really interesting. Thinking it like an accidental highway for all sorts of marine life.
I never thought about it like that. So we're talking about creatures hitching a ride through the canal, like a giant aquarium exchange program?
In a way, yeah. But it's not all fun and games. It's led to some pretty big changes in the marine environment. Some good, some, well, not so good. We call it the Lesseps migration.
Lesseps migration. Sounds ominous.
Named after our friend Ferdinand de Lesseps, of course.
Right, of course. But what exactly does it mean? Like, what's been happening?
Well, hundreds of species have migrated through the canal since it opened.
Really?
Yeah. Some of them have done really well in their new environments. They've thrived, added to the biodiversity.
Oh, that's good.
But some of them, well, they've become invasive. They're disrupting the natural balance of the ecosystems. Think of it as winners and losers in this big ecological shakeup.
Wow, so it's not all sunshine and roses then?
Not exactly. It's kind of a mixed bag with both positive and negative consequences.
Do you have any examples? Like, what are some of the species that have benefited from this connection between the seas?
Sure. The gold-band goatfish, for instance.
The what?
Gold-band goatfish. It's originally from the Red Sea, but it's established a really healthy population in the Mediterranean.
Huh, that's pretty cool. So it's like a success story.
You could say that, yeah. It's adapted well, and it's actually contributing to the biodiversity of the region.
Okay, that's good to hear. But what about the not-so-good stuff? Like, what are some of the species that have caused problems in their new environments?
Well, there's one that's become quite infamous, the Red Sea rabbitfish.
The rabbitfish. What's so bad about a rabbitfish?
Well, it came into the Mediterranean through the canal, and it's spread like wildfire. It's outcompeting the native herbivores. It's even impacting the local fisheries and the tourism industry in some places.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a real problem. I remember reading something about that. It's kind of scary to think that just connecting two bodies of water could have such big consequences.
It is. The rabbitfish is a perfect example of how even seemingly small changes can have ripple effects that go way beyond our initial intentions.
Right.
It shows us that we need to be really careful about the potential ecological impact of these big projects.
Yeah, I agree. We need to think about the long-term consequences. That's definitely a cautionary tale. But shifting gears a bit, I know that the Suez Canal also has this, like, fascinating and often turbulent geopolitical history.
Oh, yeah. It's been a focal point for conflict, power struggles, intrigue. I mean, it's a strategic location, right?
Right. It's like a choke point for global trade. So, I mean, what are some of the key moments in its geopolitical history?
Well, the 1956 Suez Crisis is a big one.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that, but I don't really know the details.
Well, basically, Egypt nationalized the canal.
They took control of it.
Yep. And that triggered a major international crisis.
Wow.
Britain, France, and Israel all got involved. It really showed how important the canal was and the lengths that countries would go to control it.
I can imagine. What happened in the end?
It was a pivotal moment. It kind of marked the decline of European colonialism and the rise of newly independent nations, asserting their sovereignty.
It's amazing how this one waterway, built in the 1800s, could still be so important in global politics today.
It really is. It's a testament to how interconnected our life is and how vital the Suez Canal is to that interconnectedness.
Right. But with all the challenges it faces, like those massive ships, the potential for natural disasters and all the geopolitical tensions, it makes you wonder, are there any alternative shipping routes out there just in case something happens to the Suez Canal?
That's a great question, and it's one that policymakers and industry leaders are actively thinking about. There are a few options, but each one has its own pros and cons.
Like what?
Well, one option is to go back to the old way of doing things, expanding the shipping routes that bypass the Suez Canal altogether.
So, like going back to sailing around the Cape of Good Hope.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that take forever? And wouldn't it be super expensive?
It would. It would add a lot of time and cost to shipping, and those costs would eventually get passed down to consumers, so we'd all end up paying more for, well, pretty much everything.
Yeah, that doesn't sound ideal.
It's not.
So what else is out there? Are there any other options?
Well, another possibility is to develop new shipping routes through the Arctic.
The Arctic? Wait, are you serious?
Yeah, I am. With all the ice melting, the northern sea route, which runs along the Russian Arctic coast, is becoming more and more accessible.
But wouldn't that be incredibly risky? And what about the logistics of sailing through the Arctic? I mean, that's a whole different ballgame.
You're right, there are definitely risks and challenges. The ice can be unpredictable, and the infrastructure for supporting Arctic shipping is still under development.
I can only imagine what kind of ships and technology you would need to navigate those waters.
It would be a major undertaking.
Plus, wouldn't going through the Arctic raise a lot of geopolitical issues? I mean, Russia controls the northern sea route, right?
It does. So, yeah, that's another factor that would need to be carefully considered. Any development in the Arctic would require international cooperation and sensitivity to the environment.
So we've got the Cape of Good Hope route, which is long and expensive, and the Arctic route, which is risky and politically complicated. Are there any other options on the table?
Well, there's been talk about developing land-based transportation corridors, like high-speed rail lines or pipelines.
Really, so instead of relying on ships, we'd be looking at trains and pipelines to move goods across continents.
Exactly.
That's an interesting idea. But wouldn't that require massive infrastructure investments? And what about the environmental impact?
You're right, there would be significant upfront costs and potential environmental concerns, but it's an idea that's being explored as a way to reduce our reliance on these maritime shipping routes.
It sounds like finding a real alternative to the Suez Canal is a pretty big challenge.
It is. It's complex. It really shows how important it is to plan ahead and work together globally to keep those trade networks running smoothly.
Absolutely. So it seems like the future of global shipping is still up in the air.
In a way, yeah. But for now, the Suez Canal, with all its histories and ecological complexity and geopolitical significance, remains a vital artery for the world.
It's a pretty remarkable feat of engineering and a reminder of how interconnected our world really is.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a story that's still being written, and it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds in the years to come. Yeah, it's like a doorway between these two completely different ecosystems,
Right.
the Mediterranean and the Red Sea.
Yeah.
And that's led to some pretty fascinating changes,
Okay.
some concerning even ecological changes. It's kind of like an accidental highway for marine life.
Oh, wow. That's a great way to put it. So we're talking about like creatures just kind of hitching a ride through the canal.
Yeah, exactly. Hundreds of species have migrated through the canal since it opened.
Wow. And they've just set up shop in their new homes?
Some of them have, yeah.
Okay.
Thriving even. They've actually added to the biodiversity in some areas.
Oh, well, that's good.
It is, but then there are others that have become, invasive species.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've heard about that.
They can disrupt the whole balance of the ecosystem. It's kind of a mixed bag,
I see.
winners and losers.
Do you have any examples of like the winners, the species that have actually benefited from this connection?
Sure, the gold band goatfish is a good example.
The gold band what?
Goatfish. It's originally from the Red Sea, but it's doing really well in the Mediterranean.
Oh, wow.
It's adapted really well, and it's actually added to the biodiversity there.
Okay, that's a good thing. But what about the losers, the species that have caused problems?
Oh, there's one that comes to mind right away, the Red Sea rabbitfish.
Okay, the rabbitfish. What's so bad about it?
It came through the canal and just spread like crazy. It's outcompeting native species, impacting the fishing industry, even tourism in some places.
Really?
Oh, yeah, it's a real problem. It's kind of unsettling to think that something as simple as connecting two bodies of water can have such big consequences.
I know, it's crazy, right?
The rabbitfish is a good example of how even seemingly small changes can have ripple effects,
Right.
impacts that we might not even anticipate. It's a reminder that we need to be really careful when we're messing with these large-scale ecosystems.
It is. It's a cautionary tale, for sure. Okay, so we've talked about the ecological side of things, but let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Talk about the geopolitical history of the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be a pretty fascinating story.
Oh, it is. Full of conflict, power struggles, all that good stuff.
I bet. So what are some of the key moments in its geopolitical history?
Well, the 1956 Suez Crisis is a big one.
Oh, yeah, the Suez Crisis. I've heard of that, but I don't really know what happened.
Well, in a nutshell, Egypt nationalized the canal.
They just took control of it.
Yep. And it led to a huge international crisis.
Wow.
Britain, France, and Israel all got involved. It really showed how important the canal was on a global scale. Countries were willing to go to war over it.
It's hard to believe something built in the 1800s could still be so central to global politics.
It's a testament to its strategic importance, and, it really marked a shift in the global power dynamics away from European colonialism and towards these newly independent nations asserting their control.
So the Suez Canal was like a symbol of that shift.
In a way, yeah.
But with all the challenges it faces, the massive ships, the possibility of earthquakes or other natural disasters, not to mention the geopolitical tensions,
Oh, yeah.
it makes you wonder if there are any backup plans. Like, what happens if the Suez Canal suddenly becomes unusable? Are there any alternative shipping routes out there?
That's the million-dollar question. And yeah, a lot of people are trying to figure that out. There are a few possibilities being floated around,
Okay.
but they all have their own issues.
Like what? What are some of the ideas?
Well, one option is to go back to the old routes, the ones that bypass the Suez Canal completely.
So back to sailing around Africa.
Pretty much, yeah.
But wouldn't that be incredibly slow and expensive?
It would. You're talking about adding weeks to shipping times, and, that cost gets passed along. Everything would get more expensive.
Yeah, I can see how that wouldn't be very popular.
No, not at all.
So what else is there?
Well, some people are talking about developing new shipping routes through the Arctic.
Wait, the Arctic? Like through all the ice?
I know, it sounds crazy, right? But with climate change and the ice melting, the Northern Sea Route along the Russian Arctic coast is becoming a real possibility.
I don't know. That sounds pretty risky. And I imagine it would be a logistical nightmare, not to mention the political implications.
Yeah, you're hitting on all the key points. The ice is unpredictable, the infrastructure isn't really there yet, and then there's the whole issue of Russia controlling the Northern Sea Route.
Right. So we've got the old route around Africa, which is slow and expensive, and the Arctic route, which is risky and politically complicated. Are there any other options out there?
Well, some folks have proposed developing land-based transportation corridors, like high-speed rail lines, pipelines, that kind of thing.
So instead of ships, we'd be moving stuff with trains and pipelines.
Exactly.
Huh. That's an interesting idea. But I imagine that would be a massive undertaking. Like, wouldn't that require huge infrastructure investments? And what about the environmental impact of building all that?
Oh, absolutely. It wouldn't be easy. There would be significant upfront costs and potential environmental impacts to consider. But, some people see it as a long-term solution to reduce our dependence on these maritime shipping routes.
It seems like there's no easy answer here.
Not really. It's a complex issue with a lot of factors to consider, but it really highlights the need for some proactive planning and global cooperation if we want to keep those trade networks running smoothly.
Right. So for now, it looks like the Suez Canal, with all its complexities, is still the best option we've got.
For now, yeah. It's a pretty remarkable feat of engineering, and it's a testament to how interconnected our world is and how vital that connection is.
It's a story that keeps unfolding, that's for sure.
Yeah, who knows what the future holds. It'll be interesting to see how the Suez Canal adapts and evolves to meet the challenges of the 21st century.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is.
Something built in the 1800s is still so crucial to how the world works today.
Yeah.
It really shows how, ahead of their time those engineers were.
Absolutely. The Suez Canal is a real testament to, human ingenuity and our drive to connect, to break down those barriers, and they make global trade happen.
It's a real symbol of how connected everything is, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
So we've talked about the history and the engineering and the ecology and the politics and even those alternative routes.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
What stands out to you the most from all of this? What's been the most, fascinating or surprising part for you?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. There's so much to choose from. I think for me, it's how this one little waterway has played such a huge role in human history.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about ancient pharaohs dreaming of connecting the seas to modern engineers, figuring out how to keep this vital artery flowing.
Right.
It's a story of innovation, of pushing the limits, and of course, of connecting the world.
I agree. It shows what we can achieve when we set our minds to something. But it also reminds us that progress doesn't always come easy.
That's right.
There's a human cost, an environmental cost.
Absolutely.
I mean, we saw that with the canal's construction, and we've seen it with the ecological impacts of connecting these two different ecosystems.
Exactly. The Suez Canal really highlights the complex relationship we have with progress. It's a lesson in careful planning,
Right.
Being responsible stewards of our planet, understanding how interconnected everything is.
And it reminds us that we can't just sit back and assume everything will be fine.
Right.
The Suez Canal faces all sorts of challenges, like those massive ships,
Yeah.
the potential for natural disasters, the geopolitical tensions.
Oh, definitely.
So as we wrap up, I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope you've learned a thing or two about this incredible waterway.
Oh, for sure.
It's certainly given me a lot to think about.
Me too. The story of the Suez Canal isn't over yet.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves in the years to come.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the Suez Canal.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.